Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call our November 1st Town Council meeting to order. Could we have a Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Labriola.
Here.
Cricket.
Here.
Mr. Moffitt.
Here.
Ms. Tillerson.
Here.
Mr. Wilson.
Here.
Under tab 1 is a set of minutes from our October 4th meeting. Could I have a motion to approve?
To move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second? Any edits, corrections, changes? All in favor?
Aye.
A few comments under the mayor's report. First of all, I'd like to add my congratulations to the Kiowa Conservancy for their 25 years. This is a marvelous organization. They have done so much. Don and their staff, the board, the volunteers. So I think we should all be very appreciative of the work that they've done these past quarter of a century. Second, a few comments and thoughts about this upcoming election, the upcoming election. There will be 3 members of council elected. This was not part of the plan that was approved over 2 years ago, but because of Dr. Parker's resignation, we will have a 3rd position open for election. All elections are important, and this will certainly be one. Over these next 5 years, several significant changes will take place. Probably be more, but these were just 5 that came to mind. Relationships will change, and some will come to an end, and that's evidenced by one of the agenda items today. So that long-standing relationship will be coming to an end in 2023. There will probably be new projects presented to the community and the council, and really refer you back to Mr. Warren's presentation earlier this year about some of the thoughts that the resort, Mr. Goodwin and his group may be doing on Kiowa. Existing construction projects will be well underway. There'll be the sites at Seafields. We'll be seeing it go vertical, the new ER across the street, along with several other projects that will be getting started on Beachwalker and possibly Andell. There'll be the expansion of new housing on Johns Island will continue, and county resources and services will be under serious pressure that could have an impact not only on our community, but also neighboring communities. We will have to be very, very mindful of that. Improvements to Main Road will be well underway, and until completed, we're just going to exacerbate the current traffic situation. So these are just some things that I could think of in terms of really what the next 5 years will have. The town council must continue to welcome our visitors and our new homeowners. We must continue to ensure our residents have accurate information on all issues that impact them. We will continue to be vigilant in controlling our financial resources and plan for any future event. And we will continue to do everything we can to protect this precious environment. So please, think through all of this and prepare your questions. Mr. McGee will be moderating the session. This is a community association session on November the 17th. And I know Jerry will welcome any of your thoughts and questions that present to the candidates. Attend the meeting on the 17th. I think it will be very important to meet all the candidates and also to hear what their thoughts and perspectives are about the future and how they see themselves in terms of impacting town council. And most importantly, vote on December the 6th. And wish everybody well. Citizen comments. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Maura McIlvain, 146 Blue Heron Pond Road. I have 2 issues. One, I previously raised at the Ways and Means Committee, but for the purposes of the record, I just wanted it to be part of the record at council, even though it involves Mr. Wilson and his proposed contract. I raised objections to the phrasing in his contract because it appeared to be a one-year term with a guaranteed second term, no ability to terminate it on any type of notice, which I question whether it comports with the rules under South Carolina law, but I'm not a South Carolina lawyer. After I raised my objections, Mayor Labriola was kind enough to come up to me and say that they're going to modify the language to include what I would call an out clause towards the end of the first year. And so I just wanted on the record my objection and then the resolution that the mayor has informed me of. The second thing I wanted to talk about is number 10A on the agenda, which is the Fourth Amendment. And I want to backtrack a little bit. The mayor just talked about how consequential the next election is and how consequential the next 5 years are. They are. And one of the reasons I'm running, one of the reasons they're consequential and others are running, this town needs to step up its game. The information on the Fourth Amendment was not attached to the agenda, and it left people wondering whether there was an extension, reasonably, because that's what has always been done. And lo and behold, late yesterday, it comes out that they're actually shortening the time. And there's now a question about whether it really ends next year, or as one community member has raised, whether it actually already ended. So we need to know that. We're entitled as community members to know exactly what the analysis is, whether the development agreement has actually already ended under state statute or is to be ended. The mayor just alluded, I think, to the fact that that may be the end of the development agreements with the partners. Not sure about that, but we have a right to know that. We have a right to know what's going to happen with, for example, the ARB. Who's going to take that over? Is KICA going to be expected to take that over? There are question after question after question. And we cannot be communicated with in the way we are being communicated with. Simple. You don't send a survey and say concessions were made when no concessions were made. You don't send out an agenda and leave the entire community wondering what the relationship with the partners is going to be, or might be proposed to be. You tell us. If you're going to shorten by amendment, you say Fourth Amendment to shorten the term of the current development agreement. So I'm here to stand and say something I've said before several times at this podium. The communications this town has with its constituents are muddled. We need to improve that. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lynn O'Leary. Do you need my address?
I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry, 29 Gray Widgeon Lane. I just want to reiterate a little bit of what Maura had spoken about. I think my general concern, and from what I've read on IQA, is that there's a feeling of lack of transparency, and it could not be intentional, but it's like we get a tidbit of information. I don't know why it has to be all given so last minute and then everybody's all rabble-roused, but I guess, we've all been in different businesses. Can we be preemptive of this? Can we be open and say, this is what we're going to look at and this is why we're looking at it? If an error has been made, nobody's going to think badly of anybody. I just feel as if, as a community, it creates more tension and more dissension and lack of trust. And I really don't think that's what y'all are looking for, but it's where you're leading us. So what I'm going to ask and implore for is, let's honestly try and get some information out for the agenda and have it be complete so that we have an opportunity to really do our homework and come to you with real quality questions instead of me standing here saying, why can't we get this? I just think it would behoove everybody in our community. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Larry Wallahan, 406 New Egret. Again, your volunteers don't really mean to be critical, but too many things seem to be knee-jerk. I don't really understand what the catalyst or the spark that created this motion we're talking about today. it, you know, things should be planned. Too many things, in my view, humble view, are knee-jerk. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Alex Fernandez, 418 Snow Egret. Council, I want to address the issue with the legal contract that's on the agenda today. I was surprised to see that because when I go back, it happens to be that in the last 2 years, the legal contract was only considered in the month of December, both years, the last 2 years. So I was surprised to see it that it's in the month of November. I don't know if it's related to the upcoming elections or not. But my point is, I think it's a courtesy to the new majority council that's being elected. You should allow them to decide who will give them legal counsel. I don't believe it's fair for this council to decide the legal counsel for 1 or 2 years. Supposedly the contract said 2 years. Whatever the term is, I believe that that's a courtesy you ought to extend to the new elected majority council for the coming council the coming year. So I would ask that you reconsider taking up this contract at this time.
Thank you. Any comment?
Good afternoon. Michael Heidingsfelder, 2 Shell Creek Landing. And for full transparency, I'm speaking here as a 20-year homeowner on Kiowa Island and as a citizen and resident of this island, and not in my capacity as a member of the town's planning commission. I would like to make 2 comments to the agenda. And exactly like my forespeaker, I would really like to ask the council to rethink 2 items on the agenda and wait until the full council is in session. We have placed at least 2, maybe 3 new members of this council in December during the elections, and give them the opportunity to decide about the legal counsel contract, as well as also give them a chance to better understand the background, the reasons, the pros and cons of the changes to the development agreement. Because all new members that will be elected, whoever that might be, will need to represent this development contract in front of every citizen of this island, and therefore, similar to the lawyer's contract, I think they need to have the chance to have a word and be involved in the decision of these 2 items. So I would like to ask the council to take these 2 agenda items off today's agenda and postpone them until we have a fully seated council. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My name is Larry Rutkowski, 232 Sparrowhawk. I agree with most of the comments that my predecessors today have uttered. In particular, I agree with Mayor Labriola that we have a very consequential election coming up. We'll have a fully seated council, and for those reasons, I am particularly concerned about the taking up of the Fourth Amendment to the development agreement now, and cannot comprehend why it cannot await the full council. I'd also like to know what the rush is, what the actual purpose of this particular amendment is, because I don't think we were provided with adequate time or resources to explore on our own what is behind this. But again, I think the most important thing is that something of this consequence should await a full council. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Item 7. I'd like to introduce David Irwin from Malden and Jenkins. He will give a presentation on the audit. Which, by the way, if you get a chance, really delve into it. I mentioned to David, it is extremely well done, very comprehensive, and will tell you a great deal about our community.
I appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. Again, my name's David Irwin, and I'm with Malden Jenkins. I was the partner who oversaw this year's audit of the town's financial statements, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon to discuss the results of this year's audit. I won't take up too much of your time, but the purpose of today's presentation is to discuss some general information about our firm, provide you all an overview of our independent auditor's report, hit a few of the financial statement highlights, talk about the results of the compliance report that we issue in conjunction with the audit, discuss some information that the auditing standards requires that we communicate to you all, and obviously to answer any questions that you all may have. For those of you who may not be familiar with our firm and our firm's experience, we are a large regional firm, have 13 offices in 5 states. The two offices closest in proximity to the town are our Savannah, Georgia, and Columbia, South Carolina office. We serve approximately 650 governments throughout the Southeast. That includes just under half the counties here in South Carolina, as well as approximately 30 cities here in South Carolina, many of which are in this area. So we have around 40 partners and managers within our firm that spend 100% of their time auditing governments. So while a lot of CPA firms, they audit governments as a way to keep their staff busy outside of tax season, for our core group, there is no tax season. We spend, again, 100% of our time auditing state and local governments. So, again, just a little bit about our firm, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to be of service to the town. Now, the financial statements themselves, they are the responsibility of town's management and members of the council. As your independent external auditors, our responsibility is to issue an opinion on these statements. We conducted our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and governmental auditing standards, and I'm happy to say that we are issuing a clean or unmodified opinion on this year's report. Again, this is what you want. This is the highest level of assurance that we can provide as your external auditor. What this means is that, in our opinion, the financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects in accordance with generally accepted accounting standards. As part of the audit, there is a compliance report that we also issued that's called the Yellow Book Report. It's towards the back of the document. I believe it starts on page 107 of your report. But this opinion, this report, it's a report on the town's internal controls and your compliance with various laws and regulations. And I'm pleased to say that we noted no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses during this year's audit, meaning we noted no significant issues in the town's internal controls throughout the course of the audit. And as I've stated before, as complicated as the financial reporting process become, the new accounting standards that are implemented each year, it makes it all the more impressive to be able to report to a council that we are issuing a clean opinion with no audit findings. So again, that's something that you all should certainly be proud of. And to me, it really speaks volumes about the hard work done by your staff. Dorota and her team, they did a great job again this year. They had everything ready for us. They were very accommodating to our audit staff, and again, worked hard to address all of our questions and get us everything that we needed in order to get the audit finalized. And one thing about the town that I very much appreciate, you all are proactive, not reactive. If something comes up throughout the year that Dorota has a question about, she'll go ahead and call us, she'll email us, because she wants to make sure that it's done on the front end. She doesn't wait until the audit starts to address any questions or concerns. So that communication throughout the year, again, results in a timely and efficient audit that we've had again this year. So really appreciate her staff and their hard work. I also want to commend your audit committee. As I mentioned earlier, we audit approximately 650 governments throughout the Southeast, and the vast majority of those do not have a formal audit committee, especially entities the size of you all. And on top of that, I really can't think of one that is engaged as your audit committee. I met with them last week to go over the financial statements. We had a good hour or so discussion. They asked some really good questions, and I could tell through that meeting that they read your report cover to cover, which if you look at your report, I think it's about 135 pages. So that was impressive in and of itself to know that they thoroughly read through that document. So, if I'm in your shoes, it's a good feeling to know that you all have an audit committee that engaged overseeing that process. So again, I just want to commend your committee and appreciate the opportunity to meet with them last week. Now for a brief overview of your financial statements. Again, you all prepare what is called an annual comprehensive financial report, otherwise known as an ACFR. And an ACFR requires the inclusion of additional information that goes above and beyond the basic financial reporting requirements. This document is submitted annually to the Government Finance Officers Association, otherwise known as the GFOA, where they put it through a pretty stringent review process. They not only have a professional staff on hand to review your document, but also a special volunteer review committee. And when they look at the town's ACFR, their goal is not to assess the financial health of the town. What they want to do is make sure that there's sufficient information within your report so the readers of your financial statements will be able to do so themselves. And through this review, the GFOA once again awarded the town the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for fiscal year 21. And that certificate is included in this year's report. And this is the 18th year in a row that the town has received the certificate. So again, congratulations to you all on that. This is a very impressive document and one that you all are certainly proud of. As you look through your report, one section that I always like to point out is the management's discussion analysis. It's in the beginning of the document, right behind our audit opinion. And the purpose of the MD&A is to make it easier for a broader audience to use and better understand your financial report. And it does this by providing a narrative explanation of the financial statements from management's perspective. So again, this section, it does a really good job of summarizing the financial statements and providing an analytical overview of the financial activities that occur throughout the year. So again, if you can, I would strongly encourage everyone to read the MD&A. The town's basic financial statements are broken down into three components, the first of which being your government-wide statements. This section provides a broad view of the town's financial statements, similar to what you would see in a private sector business. We have a slide right here that summarizes the town's financial activity from the government-wide perspective. Again, as you can see, the town ended the year with assets and deferred outflows of resources around $47 million. Approximately $16.2 million of which are your capital assets, net of accumulated appreciation. Town also had around $27.5 million in cash and cash equivalents as of year end. Look at your total liabilities and deferred inflows of resources, they're around $5.5 million. Of that amount, around $3.3 million pertain to your net pension liability and your total OPEB liability, which are your only long-term debt that the town has. And as I'm sure you can imagine, it's very few governments can say that the only long-term debt they have is their net pension and net OPEB obligations.
David, can I just ask a question at that point?
Sure.
Why did it go down from 21 to 22?
Paying off the pension.
The liability.
You all continue to pay down that liability each year, and then other financial and investment activity.
So the extent of it going down was nothing more than 20, 21, or 19 to 20?
Essentially, yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay. You all had revenues around $15.5 million compared to expenses of around $9.3 million, which resulted in an ending net position of $41.5 million. And that's an increase of approximately $6.2 million for the year. And for comparative purposes, your net position in FY21 increased by about $4.5 million. So again, all in all, another great year from an NDY perspective. The town has a very strong balance sheet and is in great shape financially. And as I mentioned earlier, you all are in a financial position that most governments would love to be in. So again, congratulations to you all on that. The second component of your financial statements are the fund level statements. Again, this is what you typically see throughout the year. This component focuses on individual parts of the government and reports the town's financial activity in more detail than that at any wide level. And if I'm in your shoes, my primary focus is the general fund. Again, that's the main operating fund of the town. So that's where the majority of your revenues are received and funds expended. And as you can see, we have a chart on this slide that shows the general fund's revenues for the year. Total revenues were approximately $9.3 million, and that represents about a 23% increase from prior year, or about a $1.8 million increase. So, again, as I mentioned to you all last year, you all are very unique in the fact that you all do not levy property taxes, which is obviously a significant source of revenue for most local governments. But for you all, as you can see on the slide, business licenses, business permits, and franchise fees are your significant revenue items, all of which saw increases this year. This slide shows the total expenditures of the general fund for the year, which are just under $7 million. And that's an increase around $800,000 compared to FY21. The majority of your expenditures are just general government, which is around $5.2 million. And you all had also approximately $785,000 in capital outlay, and just under $600,000 in public safety expenditures for the year. So after factoring in transfers from other funds, the general fund's fund balance increased by approximately $3.8 million for an ending balance of $16.5 million for the year. So one thing I always like to remind people when you're talking about fund balance, that's not necessarily what you all have in the form of cash to spend as you see fit. Fund balance is merely the difference between assets and liabilities, only a portion of which is cash. But that being said, again, this is an impressive fund balance. The general fund incurs monthly expenditures on average of about $580,000 a month. So you all ended the year with a fund balance equal to almost 2.5 years of operating expenditures. And what that means, if the town closed down on June 30th and had no more revenue sources coming in, it could continue to operate theoretically for 2.5 years without any additional revenue sources. So again, very strong fund balance, and there are a few governments that can say that. So again, hats off to you all on that. All right. The third and final component of your financial statements are the footnotes, which disclose the town's accounting methods and provide a further explanation of your operational and financial results. There really weren't any changes in your footnotes this year, so unless anybody has any questions, I won't go over those in detail. But one final item to discuss with you all is, again, it's just certain information that the auditing standards requires that we communicate. With you all receiving a clean opinion and no audit findings, this is essentially a formality, but we received full cooperation from town management and staff. There were no disagreements with management on any accounting issues or financial reporting issues. There were no significant issues discussed with management related to the business conditions or strategies that would have affected your financial statements. There were no uncorrected misstatements, and again, we are independent of the town as required by governmental audit standards. And with that, unless anybody has any questions, that concludes my presentation. But again, there's a lot of information in this report. What I tried to do is just briefly hit the highlights, what I think is the most important to you all. But if there's any questions you all may have, I'll be happy to address those. But again, we certainly appreciate the opportunity to be of service to you all. Thank your staff again for their hard work this year. And we look forward to hopefully working with you in the future.
Thank you, David. John, Dan, comments?
No, appreciate your work and the work of our financial staff and the rest of the staff.
Two comments, or two questions, David. Our rainy day fund, the monies that we, for capital expenditures, what's that percentage?
Percentage of the total.
Yeah. Or whatever it is, 6 something mil. Do you look at that? I mean, just in terms of what municipalities should or shouldn't be doing, we far exceed what would ever be.
Well, so this is not per se rainy fund. This is a fund for future capital projects.
That, right. That fund.
Oh, okay.
That fund.
So that's our capital fund and I need to look at that.
But my question is in terms of what municipalities, other municipalities are doing. Are we conservative enough? Should we be more conservative? Do you?
Well, again, as I stated, y'all are in great shape financially. But I will say this, you know, from the economic downturn that we experienced 2008, 2009, to the pandemic that we had in 1920, we're still trying to get out of, to the unique situation that you all have being a coastal town and the weather-related issues that can sometimes come to that. To me, if I'm looking at your fund balance, it's comforting to know that we have the funds available to kind of withstand those events that we've all witnessed, unfortunately, over the past 15, 20 years. So, you know, each local municipality is different. You know, to try to compare you to another city is comparing apples to oranges. But just from a broad overview, as I stated earlier, we're very impressed with your financial condition.
All right, well, thank you. And it's a good summary. I mean, the community should, hopefully will realize that. Second question, in terms of the tests that you do, tests on payroll and the like, and I know you were badgered by the audit committee. Nothing, the processes that you used, the methods that you used, you're satisfied, the audit committee was satisfied, all of the tests, the looking at paid rolls and paychecks and checks paid, et cetera.
Yeah, we do a thorough review of that, and there was nothing that came up that was cause of any concern. And if there was, it is our responsibility and duty to inform you all of that. So,
Okay, all right.
More good news, nothing to report there.
David, thank you. Thank you very much. Deruta, wonderful job. You and your staff. Stephanie, wonderful job. Mr. Taylor. John? Oh, there's John.
Good to go. Mayor and members of council, this is a update for the Kiawah Island Parkway traffic counts. As you're aware, this peak season we did traffic counts regarding the Kiawah Island Parkway. So staff has prepared just a summary of those counts and try to give some perspective around how it is connected to the requirements of the development agreement. So I'll do just a quick introduction and then talk specifically on what 10.1, the exhibit of the traffic mitigation requirements are, a summary of the actual data itself, and then kind of wrap with just the current things that the town has done in recent years regarding traffic and safety improvements, and then many are aware of the corridor study. So the town, we do monitor traffic along the Kiawah Island Parkway as the principal road that enters into the island. And so this particular year, 2022, that we have consulted that work out with Quality Counts LLC to provide those traffic counts, particularly on various segments along the Kiawah Island Parkway. In addition, with us reaching out to a third party to conduct these traffic counts, we felt it important to get a comprehensive understanding of the traffic counts, and so we did include other segments beyond just the Kiawah Island Parkway. So if those are on the island, remember that if you were driving, these tubes were placed across the right-of-way. This would include also Beachwalker, Flyway, and Governors as well. But these essentially tubes laid across the right-of-way were traffic counters that took place this summer. Particularly for the traffic mitigation requirements of the development agreement, and this is between the town and the partners. It outlines specific performance standards in order to sustain those two key infrastructure components, which is the parkway and particularly the Kiawah Island Bridge. Over time, we know that traffic will increase as development happens. And so in the development agreement itself, it placed measures to review or standards to reach in order for required mitigation to occur. And an exhibit provides those parameters for when those thresholds are met. And I'll walk through that in just a few minutes. It's also important to know that just because those thresholds are not met doesn't mean that mitigation requirements cannot occur prior to those thresholds not being met. And so how those traffic counts, when those traffic counts occur, it's during the peak season when we know that traffic is at its highest in July, and on either side of that, so the June through August is when those traffic counts are occurred, and those are for 3 months during a 2-week period. So for 2 weeks through each of these months, the traffic counts are conducted, and essentially, like I said, this is during the peak season when we know we have the most traffic on the island. So the traffic counter locations, as I kind of alluded to, are based on what is exhibited in the development agreement. However, the town, we did include additional counters, reached out to the community association in doing that, and part of all of the traffic counter locations, these are the traffic counts that have been identified. So beginning sort of as you leave the roundabout, approaching Freshfields, there's one at Freshfields Drive, Old Cedar, and I have a sort of an aerial to kind of essentially show you where these locations are. But it's just to give you an understanding that this is looking at various segments across the island. Counter location number 1, just past the Freshfields exit. And I should have started by letting you all may be aware that we do have a traffic counter at the roundabout. But however, this particular location 1 goes beyond the traffic counter at the roundabout for traffic on the Parkway. Traffic counter number 2 is just past Old Cedar Lane, and essentially that would capture any traffic that is going on to the Kiowa Island Bridge. Continuing, counter number 3, just before the intersection of Kiowa Island Parkway and Beachwalker Drive. There are two locations on Beachwalker Drive itself, sort of what I would call the head, and then the tail towards lower Beachwalker. So this has been divided in upper Beachwalker and lower Beachwalker. And then traffic counter number 6, once you pass through the gates, going to the Parkway past Kiowa Beach Drive, just across essentially from Oyster Rate. Counter number 7 and counter number 8, these are also locations of the Parkway. And then the final 3 counters are locations that council at the time of this being presented desired that we have a comprehensive study. So these traffic counters were added. So one at Governor's just past Flyway, actually counting traffic on Flyway. As you know, a lot of residents, property owners use Flyway to get to the ocean course. So having a count of that traffic there, and then one essentially capturing traffic going directly to the ocean course on Ocean Course Drive. So the development agreement does speak of evaluating this traffic. And how do we do that is based on this acronym NCTV, which stands for the near capacity traffic volume. And these are measuring volumes, particularly on the 2 infrastructure components of the Kiowa Island Parkway itself and the Kiowa River Bridge. The near capacity traffic volume is essentially a number that represents at a time where 70% of the capacity of those facilities is reached. And so in determining that 70% capacity, it's measured essentially for each of those. For the Kiowa Island Parkway, 1,900 vehicles per hour, and for the Kiowa River Bridge, 1,700 vehicles per hour. So the capacity of those 2 facilities, as determined when this agreement was written, are 1,900 and 1,700 is the capacity. And so when we say near capacity, we're talking about 70% of those 2 vehicles per hour. And this is measured in one direction. So we're counting traffic coming on the island or counting traffic off the island, in this case, eastbound or westbound. And so particularly for the Kiowa Island Parkway itself, that 70% value is 1,330. And for the Kiowa River Bridge, it's 1,190. And again, that's vehicles per hour. So it's counting how many vehicles pass a certain counter location within the hour. And if you think about it now, we know what those capacity hour times would be in the morning when a lot of folks are coming onto the island, contractors, workers, et cetera, and then in the afternoon, those peak times. So what happens when that near capacity traffic volume is reached? And this is continuing to evaluate the traffic itself. So again, based on the development agreement, traffic mitigation exhibit 10.1, when that capacity traffic volume is exceeded for 3 consecutive days, and that's during the counting periods, and that's exclusive of any sort of high peak abnormal events or special events that may cause that traffic to be peaked outside of that consistency period. So when that 3 consecutive days has been reached, the developer would be responsible for submitting to the town a traffic mitigation plan. And so that traffic mitigation plan would outline specific measures that essentially would reduce the volumes below that near capacity traffic volume. So essentially getting it back below that 70% volume to where the capacity is or is heading towards. And then finally, after the developer has submitted that traffic mitigation plan to the town would essentially review that plan and approve that plan, and the developer would be responsible for implementing those specific traffic mitigation measures. And that would be within a time period identified within the 6 months of that being approved. So what is possible when it comes to traffic mitigation measures? The development agreement has outlined specific measures that have been listed here for you, that you can see: turn lanes, acceleration or deceleration lanes, other road widening, alternative van pools, and other alternatives to decrease that traffic. What's not essentially on the table is essentially widening the parkway to 4 lanes. So that wouldn't be essentially an option available for the developer to be required to widen the parkway 4 lanes the entire way of the parkway. So I'm gonna take a pause and just kind of do a summary of the data. This is just an example sheet of what our third-party consultant has provided to us. There are over 260 pages of this spreadsheet that looks similar like this. So sifting through this, we wanted to be able to kind of give a summary to kind of understand exactly what all of this data kind of means. And so each of the values here are listed are vehicles per hour. You can see to the left-hand side of the column here is the start time, and it's each will show you the days based on that counting period, the traffic direction, and whether or not AM or PM peak hours are also listed as part of this. So in my analysis, what I did was break it down by month, as the counting periods are by month, and then took the 2 principal, essentially highest areas of where traffic volumes were highest, and that was essentially leaving or coming onto the island, leaving, however you think about it, just at Freshfields, and then Old Cedar to essentially get the exact number is what would essentially cross the Kiowa River Bridge. And so that figures to the left under number 1 counting period Freshfields Drive, those would essentially be married or metric or evaluated essentially to that 1,330 number as the near capacity volumes. And number 2, Old Cedar, would be measured more closely to the 1,190 because this is the closest to the Kiowa River Bridge. And so you can see to the left-hand side, the highest AM peak, and I won't go into too depth of all of these numbers, but I would just kind of give you a summary here that the AM peak volumes at 8 AM, around 700 to 800. That's sort of on average. But to the left here, you can see 803 is the highest volume, 865 vehicles per hour is the highest peak volume in the afternoon, and that corresponds to June 9th. So what I did for an evaluation is to look at, because the test essentially is for 3 consecutive days, I took the highest value and mirrored that to the left or to the right, wherever that highest value is. And for those that may not have had 3 consecutive days on the highest value, but still had sort of a high value, I also listed those. So that's why you see sort of 2-3 consecutive day periods for that number 1 counter of Freshfields Drive. Continuing, like I said, number 2, Old Cedar, averages there range in the 700s. That's AM and PM peak hours. Shifting to July, July is probably a busier month, so these traffic volumes you can see have been elevated. And that's the reason why we conduct these traffic counts during the peak season. So July being the peak, and sort of on either side of that, June and August, the highest values consistently would be in the month of July. And so you can see at the Freshfields counter, there was a period on July 13th that the vehicles per hour highest count in the afternoon reached up to 940 vehicles per hour. Similarly, in July, 917 vehicles per hour in the afternoon that same day. So again, this is sort of the same metric, just looking at August. And what I did for the month of August included Beachwalker Drive as well on this sheet. One of the things that I do want to alert council is that you may have gotten emails or phone calls about the traffic counter being malfunction. And that's just due to either one of the tubes may have come loose. And so anytime that one of those tubes have come loose, we may have lost some data. And so this is a big shout out to Brian, Craig, Kika, and our the public safety folks. If anytime that one of those counters was malfunction, we quickly try to contact our consultant to get those back in operation. So that's sort of a summary of just kind of what the data looks like in its highest peak volumes. You can see like during 3 consecutive day periods, ranging from essentially 700 to 800 number. So the question at hand is, has that near capacity traffic volume been reached? And based on the counts that we received, that near capacity traffic volume has not been reached. Now we have seen elevated traffic volumes over the past few years, but that near capacity traffic volume has not been reached based on these metrics. 1,300 vehicles per hour on the Parkway, or 1,190 vehicles per hour coming across the Kiowa River Bridge. Now, the question, and following that, additionally noting that the development agreement did state that mitigation efforts are not required if those thresholds are not met. And so historically, the town has looked at mitigation measures, and I just want to kind of recount some of those things that have occurred already, and then put sort of perspective of the active projects, and then looking at potentially those that may occur in the future. So in 2019, in evaluating the traffic on Beachwalker Drive, there was a turn lane added entering the county park. So that was something that was a traffic mitigation measure on Beachwalker Drive. And so similarly, we know in 2020, ahead of the PGA, those were improvements made at the intersection there of the entrance to the staging and event parking area. Those are additional sort of metrics for traffic mitigation measures. And just recently this year, we've looked at Beach Walker Drive and our bike ped study that we've done. And so that project has been underway. The first phase of that has been completed, particularly on the bike ped safety component, but it's still a traffic mitigation as far as safety is concerned. And then we have an active project that we are underway now with the intersection of Kiawah Island Parkway and Beach Walker Drive. Yes, Beach Walker Drive. And so from a holistic standpoint, traffic has always been a concern, but it's putting in the measures in place as we have evaluated the traffic consistently over the last few years. And I listed the last bullet point there, traffic mitigation measures to be determined. As you know, that we've conducted a comprehensive study of the parkway and all the segments adjacent to the parkway, including Betsy Carrison Parkway and Seabrook Island Road. And so that traffic study that was done by Kimley Horn identified specific traffic mitigation measures for the town to be prepared to understand in the long term, both looking towards 2026, what we identified short-term conditions, and then to 2036 for long-term conditions. And so those are essentially a precursor to what we can expect for what traffic mitigations may be needed in the future based on the development. And just for understanding of this presentation here is in materials, but we will provide the list of that data, over 200 pages of data on our development resources page so that the community can see those data sets as well. But that kind of ends my presentation. If there are questions or?
John, great piece of work. Great piece of work. The previous slide, no, I'm sorry, the next one. The linkage between this information and the Kimley Horn study, how does it connect? I mean, can you foot to those, your numbers in terms of the projections and the analysis that Kimley Horn used?
So what Kimley Horn actually did in their assessment was really look specifically of how traffic could be compared to what's development is happening. What this particular count did was just really look at what the number values are. So whereas Kimley Horn's assessment is factoring in specifically future development decisions that may occur. So we look on island, the things that are happening pertaining to Beach Walker, future projects that the resort might take on, and all of the sort of quote unquote build out of Kiawah, right, in addition to the undeveloped parcels adjacent to the parkway that may impact traffic. And so that also included, like you mentioned earlier, MUSC,
right,
Seafields, and a number of other developments sort of in this vicinity. I don't know if that answers the...
Well, just, in terms of the data set that Kimley Horn used, does it still go back to these numbers?
So
I understand build out and what goes along with it, but at some point in time, it has to get back to traffic.
So Kimley Horn's numbers, they conducted their own counts independent of this because that occurred prior. They used, I think, 2021 numbers specifically. Okay. So they conducted their own sort of traffic count values as part of their assessment. So if the question is whether or not these values of 2022 are directly inside the assessment for Kimley Horn, then no. But innately, the traffic volumes would have been assessed based on 2021 values. That's when.
Okay, well, then that gets to my point. We're saying that the report done by Kimley Horn, you know, in terms of, we've got the traffic consideration here, but if they're using a different data set, said another way, if Kimley Horn would use this data set, would their conclusions be any differently?
No. The difference would be, I think, marginal, just because they are considering their decisions and what would be recommended on as far as mitigation measures on the parkway. The traffic volumes are sort of I don't want to say a minute part of that, but the bigger question is what developments are happening around that would influence those numbers.
So the only thing that could influence what they suggested would be if there was a huge difference between the 21 and 22 actual traffic numbers.
Correct. So in one sort of a quick an analysis that I did, probably I think probably maybe about 30% more traffic would reach us to near capacity volumes that would probably push that number, and that would mean 300 cars per hour. And there's no way to really measure 300 cars per hour based on the developments, I think, that are occurring at the rate and speed that we see today.
But if you, don't let me put words in your mouth, John, but if you went back and said, how do these numbers that you just reviewed compare to the baseline that Kimberly Horn
Right.
used
I guess
for
it- yeah.
21, can we look and see what those differences might be?
Yeah, we can look, and I mean, if we need to forward these on to them, they can switch out that analysis, but I think it would be very comparable. The differences between 2021 and 22, I don't think are
It'd be
significantly
interesting
different.
just to validate that.
It would be very comparable, I looked today.
You did look.
Okay, well, I mean, I think that's an important part, because, we're saying we committed to the resources, we spent money, we bought this, we had Kimberly Horn do the study, we have this study. I just want to make sure that we're not getting tripped up in terms of the baseline data. But, okay, I make the points.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the baseline data is the same. One of the things that Kimberly Horn is also looking at, is they're also looking at the land use pattern, or they're looking at the land use, future land use, and they're making some projections based on that, but the baseline numbers are going to be very much the same because not a lot of change from 2021 to 2022 in terms of those baseline numbers. But as an example, for Upper Beach Walker, we had Kimberly Horn when they did the assessment there based on the baseline numbers for the traffic. We asked them to do some additional projections based on future land use plans.
Okay,
So
All right.
their study is going to be a little bit more comprehensive than just looking at the raw data in terms of the numbers.
oh, this is a great study. Dan, any comment?
Well, the only comment I had, and we're all aware of this, I think as important as this is in terms of the capacity of those key roads, we all still know that because we have a gate, which is like having a traffic stop on your way to wherever you're gonna go, the work that's currently going on with Kika and the town and others involved at the intersection of Beach Walker and figuring out how to get passes away from the front gate are critical, because that intersection is gonna be a headache the rest of our lives if we don't create through capacity that doesn't exist today. And there are ways to do it, we're focused on it, which is great. This doesn't solve this problem, it doesn't help this problem, we gotta get people through the gate faster. That's what the key thing is. Anyway, and we're focused on it, so that's good. But this is good, at least it says we don't have a capacity issue from a road point of view in the immediate future, next few years. So, good, great.
Is this a program that you use in terms of, you didn't like hand crunch these numbers? I mean, is this something that can be updated periodically?
So, I mean,
You crunch these numbers.
the data sets itself, if I go back to
Yeah.
this sheet right here is over 200 odd pages. So I've reviewed all of these pages to make sure that none of the numbers exceeded our volumes, capacity numbers. But I did do quick studies, I think, to ensure that comparing our previous years, this year,
Okay,
so a little bit of both.
just one previous year?
No, so I meant the differences, I think, between the previous years, as you know, we didn't have a comprehensive look entirely of
Yeah.
all of these different things in the previous year. We utilized the traffic counts at the roundabout. But if I compared the two, we've seen from 2019, 2020, that numbers are slowly increasing along that particular section.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well done, John. Well done. Is that it, John? Dan?
No, good.
Okay, well done. 2 points of old business, approval of ordinance 2022-06. This is the second and final reading, and ordinance 2022-07. This is the second and final reading. Do we need it?
Mr.
Oh.
Taylor, would you like to
Oh,
take both your
okay.
ordinances for, under old business, for the HVAC and the noise generator?
Yeah, so for ordinance 2022-06, this is going for a second reading. There's no changes there in the materials from the previous meeting. As you know, staff has been presented for administrative relief for setbacks for generator stands. And so there are no changes from the previous council meeting. Are we doing one of them at a time, or?
I think so.
Okay.
Could I have a motion to approve?
Yeah, so moved. This is the generator stands, yeah.
Discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, 2022-07.
So with 2022-07, this was directed for staff to review based on impacts from the previous generator stands and the setbacks, and so particularly how noise is related. So what's been presented for this particular amendment, it has changed from the first reading. Essentially, we are now allowing sort of a distinction between portable and whole home or standby generators. And essentially, those would be exempted for any situation that would be an emergency standpoint. But outside of that, they would need to meet the same requirements of the noise ordinance as presented in that chart. I think it's 804.
Okay.
So when my generator goes on for its normal weekly hello, I'm here operating, it's got to meet the standards.
Correct.
But when it's operating in an emergency, that's exempted.
Correct.
Got it.
Okay, motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, we have two items under consent to consider approval of the contract agreement for municipal legal services. Stephanie, I'm going to call on you. I think there were questions that were posed. We had kind of a sidebar discussion, but I think if you could go back over to, while everybody's here, relative to one of all those things. And the other thing that I made a note of had to do with the date. I think there was a question posed relative to the date. So I think those were the two things that were posed. Please.
Yeah, so at Ways and Means, the discussion was part of the legal counsel's contract. And specifically, C states that this agreement shall commence first day of January 2023 and shall continue thereafter for 1 year with a 1 year auto renewal. And so it was brought to Ways and Means' attention that there was essentially or concern that there was no legal way for council to terminate the agreement. There wasn't any type of clause in there that was explicit. And so I did go back and look at our 2022 agreement with legal counsel, and it was inadvertently left out. And so what I would like to propose to add back to the 2023 agreement, I'll read this out loud. So essentially, if I believe this is in everyone's package, possibly. If not, I'll read it out. I'm going to read it out anyways. It will state that to replace what I just read, it'll be replaced with, this agreement is effective as of first day of January 2023 for a period of 1 year and shall automatically renew annually unless either party gives written notice of intent not to renew on or before 60 calendar days prior to expiration. If either party provides written notice of non-renewal, the contract will expire on December 31st, 2023, unless earlier terminated. That is what's in our current agreement, and I propose that that transfers over to this agreement.
Okay.
With regards to the timing of approval, I also went back and looked at the timing of approval. The 2019 contract agreement was approved in November of 2019. The other 2 years after that was approved in December. It was approved with the current council. So for us, our council serves, their last day is on the same day as election. So the council in place, not the new council, approves the last 3 contracts. The last contract, it was just renewed at the same rate, so that's why it didn't come. Yes, but it was never held over per se. I think the question came up that, well, it was done in December, so I think they assumed that it was a new council, but it was actually the current council. But the first one was in November and the last 2 in December, so this is just follows our normal process of reviewing, council reviews and considers approval towards the end of the year.
Thank you, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
Okay, so thank you for the questions that were posed that helped clarify. Any other discussion relative to contract? Motion to approve
Yeah, I will move to approve.
With the suggested change.
with the
With the
change.
change, yeah, and so there is an exit
Okay.
clause and 60 days notice, and obviously if there was a for reason, yeah, we're fine.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the contract with Placer, I don't think we need to have any discussion on that, so
If you can just,
You might mention what it
Yeah.
is, yeah.
I'm not
Or
sure.
Stephanie could.
Yeah. Go over my,
Mayor and members of council, the Ways and Means Committee is making a recommendation to approve those 2-1. But Placer, what it is an economic development software tool, but it can be used beyond economic development. It is a tool that essentially tracks your cell phone service. So they have a partnership with over 500 different apps. So if you load an app on your phone that can be from anything, and you allow it to turn on your location, so a lot of times it'll say to be able to accurately pinpoint where you're at, turn on the location. When you turn on those locations, essentially there's probably a terms and condition that I don't think anyone ever reads, I don't know, but there's, this fine print. And Placer essentially is part of that fine print that gives third party the ability to be able to essentially use that data, that information. So it's not everyone, I think they said about 32 million subscribers, and so they're able to essentially use 10% of that they're tracking. So what happens is that as people come onto the island, they're tracking what you're doing in terms of the restaurants you go to. We're able to look at where people are coming from. If we have a lot of people that's coming from the Northeast to Kiowa, we may reflect that in home sales because we might see a lot of people buying homes that's from that area. But they're also able to track from an emergency standpoint or traffic mitigation. So we're able to essentially create a pinpoint, and we're able to maybe see how many people are traveling, not only through the gate, but they're also able, because they gave an example that if there's a bus of 50 people in that bus, there may be 5 or 10 people that's part of Placer. And so we're able to really know exactly how many, the numbers, number of people coming through the gate, how many on the island. We can use it from a short-term rental standpoint to be able to use that as the resource for the town. We're able to, through our state aid tax committee, we're always trying to figure out from the town, how do we balance how much we use restricted versus non-restricted, so we're able to get that information. It's just a tool of information. Also, one of the things that we can do is we can share it with our partners, so we're able to create reports. So if there's something that the association would like, or any of our smaller restaurants or merchants will like, or even to the sanctuary, we're able to do a laundry list of reports that we think would be helpful. Will be a learning process. There's a lot there. There's a lot of information that you can grab. You can look at it from zip codes. There may be some other things that I don't remember, but there's just a ton of information that we would like to, we'll be able to dive into. We can create specialized reports, and then they have essentially template reports.
I mean, potentially, as I look at it, and we're learning all of this, but we could understand the commute patterns of all of our employees on the island.
That's correct.
And figure out which roads are most critical, what time of day it is, what day of the week it is, and better manage employment and traffic together, and see where we have got problems and where we have opportunities.
Yeah.
The question will be, can we use it?
One of the things that I would love to work with them on is, if we're talking about traffic, is to be able to maybe try to pinpoint and track with all the traffic coming onto the island, with all the construction going on, how much of that traffic that John just went through, how much of it is potentially construction contractors, landscapers, and employees. So to be able to really kind of do a deep dive to compare how many are really residents. So while we may be looking at all this traffic that's generated, it could be that a good bit of it is coming from outside sources. And so we'll be able to look at that and really be able to probably hone in on maybe our traffic issues. So there's just a lot of things with this program.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
Could I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Second.
No.
Call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Call nay.
Nay.
Okay. It passed 2-1. All right. New business. Approval of the Fourth Amendment. Joe? Well, Joe's walking up to the podium just to provide a little bit of context because I think there's just been a lot of questions about this. Reflect. Earlier this year, the partners came to the town, the partners came to the community and proposed a development on what we refer to as Upper Beach Walker. There were a number of community presentations to give the community an idea of what they were thinking relative to building on that piece of property. Embedded in that presentation were changes that were proposed to the development agreement. We did not proceed with it. It did not go anywhere, okay? Instead, the developer took another course of action and it was taken to the Planning Commission at last month's meeting. As a part of that, Joe initiated a deep dive into the development agreement itself. And if you recall, we included an additional counsel, Ross Appel from his firm downtown, have been working on this subject. I was just looking at my own notes. It goes back to early summer. So the framework about looking at analyzing, dissecting this agreement goes back over that period of time. And anyway, so that's a teeny bit of context in terms of how and why it may have started from a project, but it ended up in terms of really or changes to the development agreement. And Joe is here to kind of walk us through the conclusions or what has been reached here.
So, as you said, we've been looking at the development agreement for quite some time. The town has brought in additional counsel, Ross Appel, who has an enormous amount of experience with dealing with development agreements. Ross and I both brought some issues to staff and to council that we generally both agreed on. Ross and I saw eye to eye on a lot of these things. One thing that we definitely felt like needed to be addressed was the term of the development agreement. Now, this is the development agreement between the town and the developer. Now, it was entered in 2013 as the amended and restated development agreement. There was a prior, well, there are actually more than one prior agreement, but this one purported to be an amended and restated or an amendment and a restatement of the 2005 development agreement that had been in place between the town and this same developer. And we were a little concerned about how long this agreement lasted. As you can see, this is just a relevant page from the 2013 amended and restated development agreement. It says, the agreement shall expire on January 1, 2023. If the property owner shall provide the town a certification that highland within the real property and owned by the property owner as of January 1, 2016 is 250 acres or greater, the town and the property owner shall enter an amendment to the agreement extending it to January 1, 2026. So that actually, so under the the original language, it expired in 2023, but as long as there was 250 acres left to develop, it would be extended to 2026. And there's not a lot of wiggle room for the town if for some reason they didn't want to do that. This did not leave them a lot of wiggle room. So, in this was in 2019, I believe, they entered the first amendment to this development agreement. And sure enough, it did extend the term of the development agreement to January 1, 2026. So that is where we are sitting today. The development agreement lasts until January 1, 2026, by terms of that first amendment that was entered in 2019. So why this was of concern to us was this is from the South Carolina Local Government Development Agreement Act. It's section 6-31-40. And this is a state law that governs development agreements. And as you can see, unfortunately, I had some highlighting that didn't make it through, but this provides the term how long these development agreements can last, and it's connected to how large the development is. If it's more than 1,000 acres, it can last 20 years. If it's between 250 and 1,000 acres, which is where that development agreement was, it can last 10 years, right? So going from 2013 to 2026 raises some concerns. In addition, I'll get into this a little bit later, the 2013 development agreement, since it was amended and restated, it adopted the ordinances that were in place going all the way back to 2005 when the original development agreement was entered. So this means that technically the development agreement stayed held in place, all of the town's ordinances from 2005 to 2026. Or 21 years. And again, to be clear, development agreements, generally speaking, the purpose of a development agreement is so the developer can have some sort of comfort that it's not going to have the laws changed on it. And so these development agreements, generally speaking, the purpose of them is to freeze the ordinances in place at the time the agreement is entered until the development agreement is over. And again, as pointed out here, that's 10 years is the longest you can do that. So this raised concerns with me, but I will point this out, and this is to show what I think was being thought of at the time that these agreements were entered. This is another provision of the state law. It's 6-31-60. And you can see it says the duration of the agreement, the development agreement must include the duration of the agreement, which makes sense since it's limited. However, the parties are not precluded from extending the termination date by mutual agreement or from entering into subsequent development agreements. So I think that a lot of the parties had this in mind when they were amending the agreements to extend them longer and longer and longer. I think reasonable minds can differ as to whether you can wipe away that 10-year limit simply by entering amendments. My personal opinion, and the personal opinion that I offered to council, and the personal opinion, the legal opinion that Mr. Appel offered to council, was that this does not abrogate the 10-year limitation, that you cannot circumvent the 10-year limitation by entering amendment after amendment after amendment, because then, of course, you could extend it forever. So the other law I want to point out, and this is what's important to understanding when that 10-year clock starts to run. This is, again, state law 6-31-80, and it's about the law and the fact at the time the agreement is entered. And this simply says that the laws applicable to the development of the property, and that's the municipal ordinances, subject to a development agreement, are those in force at the time of the execution of the agreement. So again, we have a little bit of ambiguity here because there was a 2005 agreement and then a 2013 amendment to that agreement. The 2013 amendment, and this is really what kind of got me going, honestly, to be concerned with this issue, the 2013 amendment brought in all those 2005 laws and held them in place and started that clock running back in 2005. So my concern was not only to limit the amended 2013 development agreement to 10 years, but also to make sure that the clock started running at the correct time in 2013, not to provide the developer protection all the way back to 2005.
Emphasis not.
Pardon?
Emphasis not.
Yes, not to fix that problem as well. And we sat down with the developer and talked this issue through, I think in recognition of what is a good relationship between the town and the developer that has lasted for decades and decades. Both sides agreed that it was beneficial to enter an agreement to address this issue. I just don't know that there are any two ways about it other than explaining it, that this was something that all the parties felt was an appropriate issue to address, even though there was probably some space for the developer to argue that they could do this simply by amending the agreement again and again and again. They accepted our interpretation of this situation and agreed that the 2013 agreement should only last 10 years, and that clock should only start running in 2013, not all the way back to 2005. So this is the pertinent part. And I would point out, I didn't copy all these pages, but all of this is explained in the whereas clause for the Fourth Amendment that's been prepared, about the history that the original 2013 agreement said it goes to 2023, but an option to extend to 2026. There was a First Amendment that adopted that 2026 option, and here we are with the Fourth Amendment. And what it does is two things. Number one, it makes clear that Section 21, which is the term of the agreement section, shall now state the agreement shall expire on December 4th, 2023. Period. No more room for extensions. Number 2, Section 10 of the agreement, which deals with the applicable laws. And again, under the current language, it says the laws in place in 2005 are what's applicable. So we're changing that to make clear that the laws in place at the time that the amended agreement was entered in 2013 are applicable. Unfortunately, it's on 2 pages, but the laws applicable to the development of the real property subject to this agreement are those in force at the time of the execution of this agreement, being the amended and restated agreement, i.e. the 2013 laws. There was additional language in Section 10 referring back to 2005, and we changed it right there to December 3, 2013, when the agreement was entered. So that's the other fix we did. We made, instead of giving them 26 years of our ordinance being in stasis, not changing for them, we have changed it to 10 years, which we believe brings it in compliance with state law and the state mandated requirements. Again, I can't emphasize it enough. We're not casting anyone under the bus here. Reasonable minds can disagree about, whether these terms can be circumvented by amendments. That's clearly what people thought in the past. I had a question about that, and we felt like it was something that needed to be addressed. And so that is what we are doing today. I think it's also important to recognize that when the 2013 development agreement was entered, at the same time, the town made the development agreement and the standards encompassed in that development agreement. And in particular, the standards encompassed in Exhibits 13.1, 13.2, 13.3, and these are development standards, lot size, setback, density. All those standards were made a part of the city's zoning code. They were adopted as part of the city's zoning code. So those are all in place, regardless of all of this. This change means that any other standards not addressed in that zoning code that was adopted in 2013 are going to apply to the developer. So anything passed between 2005 and 2013, and there are a few things we've identified that might come into play, are going to apply to any development going forward. So that's kind of it.
Just to affirm, the initiation of all of this was on behalf, you acting on behalf of the town.
Certainly.
And
Yes.
initiated all the discussions. At this particular point, it would be unlawful to continue as it is? I mean,
It is, technically speaking, it was an illegal provision because it was not in compliance with state law.
so it's important to get this thing done.
It is. It's not just, yes, it's important to bring it into compliance with state law, full stop.
And the question relative, that last point that you made in terms of standards within the development agreement being effectively embedded into the town, I mean,
Yes, sir.
that was done by ordinance and public hearing and all of that,
Planning Commission.
the whole.
The whole, everything. And as you pointed out, what this is going to do is come December 2023, this development agreement is going to sunset.
It's done.
Now, those zoning code adoptions will still be in place, and whoever is in charge at that time can decide what to do with that and how to address it, if they need to be changed or amended.
Say that again?
The zoning code that was adopted in 13.1, 13.2, and 13.3,
But that's the town zoning.
that's correct.
Oh, yeah.
And the town will be free to change them completely, get rid of them, or do whatever it wants.
Last affirmation. In the course of all of this, was there any residual benefit to the developer? I mean, did they?
Other than having a legal contract in place, no.
Okay. Dan, John, any questions?
No, those two were my concerns.
So there's clarity in their minds. This agreement is going to end in December of next year. Correct. Clarity in our minds. If we were to continue to ignore this, we have not done our job because we now understand beyond 10 years is against state law. Correct? Correct. So action needs to be taken, should be taken. Yes, that is my advice.
So other than the usual rumor and innuendo that goes around when we decide anything, are we likely to get some kind of aha from the developer by virtue of them getting this and saying, okay, we've got them now? Or is there really no incremental benefit to the developer's plan as a result of this?
I mean, there was no quid pro quo discussed with the developer. They did not ask us of anything. I think they have an interest in having an agreement that complies with the law. But other than that, I mean, I can't read minds, but there was certainly no discussion. I think what happened was they were accepting of our legal interpretation of this. And I think they do benefit from having this issue addressed and put to the side and having something that's in place that's firmly on legal ground. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And as Mayor LaPuma always guided me, you can't bind future councils. So a future council can do whichever, change ordinances, they will go through.
They could enter another development
They can enter,
agreement.
they can do whatever they would wish to do, whenever they would wish to do that. And that's nothing more than, that's the way the law works. Future councils can do that, so, right?
Correct.
All right.
Mr. Mayor, if I have can I just have a quick question for Joe? I'm not sure if I'm going to ask this question correctly, because I'm not sure the question. In regards, there's been some conversation, I think, in regards to the 2005 agreement and the term limit with regards to the 2005 agreement and the fact that there's belief that that was extended beyond what's legally allowed. Could you address that?
So
I think I shared that kind of comment with you.
Yeah, the 05, again, I can tell you, the 05 agreement, I'm fairly certain had a 2015 termination date. So that didn't matter because they had a bunch of amendments and someone decided it's time to just update the whole thing. And we're going to call it an amended and restated agreement in 2013. And we're just going to flip it completely wholesale. And again, I think the thinking at the time was, this is the same agreement, so we're going to hold on to the 2005 laws. I see, again, there's some ambiguity in the state law that says you can amend it whenever you want. I don't think you can amend it in such a way as to wipe out that 10-year limitation, and I think that's what happened in 2013. They tried to make it just an amendment. They did make it just an amendment to the 2005 initial agreement, which would have been fine if they had adopted the laws in place at the time of that amendment. 2013 laws, number one. And number two, had made the term only 10 years so that it expires in 2023. So that is what we are doing. I hope that answers
So, is that?
the question.
What was the,
That's flat out wrong.
no, not flat out wrong, but just a question.
Can we ask a question? You just said.
I'm sorry, Brad, you have to go and state, you have to, or at least stand up, state your name and address for the record.
146 Blue Heron Pond Road. You stated that you can't extend the agreement through amendment, correct? That was your interpretation, I guess, is what you came up with.
I don't think you can abrogate the 10-year limitation.
Right. So in 2005, you had a 10-year agreement. You did not enter into a new agreement. You entered into what was called an amended agreement, and you said it was an amended agreement because they didn't want to do a completely new agreement. So you entered into an amended agreement, which then extended it beyond the 10 years, which would have ended in 2015. So isn't there a question whether the agreement really ends in 2015?
We have addressed that by putting in place, adopting the laws that were in place at the time in 2013, which is that's the substance of the issue, is that you don't freeze the laws for more than 10 years. And with this amendment, the 2013 agreement does not freeze the laws for more than 10 years. And I mean, if, that is my opinion, so.
I have a question, if I could. David DiStefano, 31 Burroughs Hall, Key Island. I think the reason that you can amend, you got the 10-year overall limitation. If you happen to be in a 5-year agreement, I can see where you can amend that so it's a total of 10 years. The 2005 agreement expired in 2015. We've got a different analysis of changing the 2013 to 2023 and the 2023 to 2026. We're basically saying you can't get around the 10-year agreement, period. But the 2013 gets beyond the 10-year period. And I agree, not a South Carolina lawyer, but I've done a lot of this type of work. It ended in 2015. And I think before this is voted on today, we have to get a better analysis of that fact.
Joe, so 2005, everyone's kind of focused, they're talking about 10 years. Based on the state laws, based on acres. So in 2005, there would have been more. So would it have allowed more than 10 years based on the acres?
I can't,
I'm sorry, I was talking to me.
So I think what some of you guys are proposing here is that the town should have just unilaterally terminated the 2013 agreement.
Right.
And that was certainly something that was, I'm somewhat limited in what I can go into by the attorney-client privilege, but I will say that all options were presented. Look, can I finish my answer?
Yeah, I'm just raising my hands.
All options were certainly presented to council, and I think everyone agreed, especially given the fact that the developer was amenable to this, fixing this issue, that it would be far, far better to fix the issue by limiting it, bringing it into compliance with state law. And with this amendment, the 2013 agreement complies with state law, full stop. As opposed to yanking the rug or attempting to yank the rug and unilaterally terminating the 2013 agreement, which, I think it's, that we are always interested in a resolution that is legal, that is reasonable, and is entirely in compliance with the state law. And honestly, With this amendment, the 2005 agreement doesn't enter into any of this. What we're talking about is the 2013 agreement, and that is all we're talking about.
Maybe this is off the track here. I'm glad we have 3 candidates running for election. That's the beauty of elections. I guided this. So either we get, and part of this job and other jobs is to protect the town. So yeah, we could have walked in the room, 2015, it's done. What would we have gained? We'd have exposed the town to a suit, disrupt decades of relationships. What would we have gained? They had already backed out of the Beachwalker project. They knew what they were going to do with the Beachwalker project with or without the development agreement. There is no more. There's 100 dwelling units adjacent to Freshfields, which they can pursue when they can pursue it, when they want to pursue it. What would we have gained by exposing the town? What would I have gained by doing that? So like Joe said, this is what we did. So 3 candidates, you've got a lot to think about, or more candidates. You got a lot to think about. The moment in time, there's changes, then so be it. It was a decision that was made. Goodness knows how many attorneys we have in this room that can be shaking their heads affirmatively or negatively. But that's what we decided. Right, wrong, or indifferent. I don't know how else to explain this. We cannot keep up with the level of discourse and concerns and dialogue and support and criticism and accusations and implications. It goes on and on and on. We can't keep up with them. So I'm not bearing my soul here. That's what we did. So we're ending the agreement 2023. Have a cordial relationship with the development. We are in no one's pocket. I don't know what else to do. New council can come in, throw out the whole damn thing. But this is how I am going to recommend to my colleagues here that we end this. We have a definitive termination date based upon the law, based upon Joe's recommendation. There was grave concern about the wisdom and the guidance from Joe. We went to Ross Appel. So we're spending more town's resources to try to make sure that we're checking and double checking. I've sat with Ross, I don't know how many times. He affirms all of this. And as was pointed out, other attorneys can say, we don't agree, we would change it. That's clearly your prerogative. But I don't know how much more we can say about this matter. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Larry Rakowski, again.
Would you go up to the mic?
Yeah.
The people online can't hear you.
Thank you for indulging me. Larry Rutkowski, 232 Sparrowhawk. Sometimes my hearing aids malfunction, but I didn't hear anyone here today say that we should unilaterally abrogate the 2013 agreement. I happen to agree with Dave. I think the agreement probably is invalid, null and void, but that's for somebody else to determine. I'm not suggesting we take that position as a town. But if we're being open and honest, you shouldn't say that when they accuse anybody here of making that remark when no one did. More importantly, Mayor Labriola, I respect you. I appreciate all the work you've done for the town. But you just made a statement a while back that implied that, well, if you don't like this, the next council can fix it. Well, that's not really true, because if we enter into an agreement, the town is bound by the agreement. To try to say, well, the next council can fix it is just inaccurate. The only thing I've heard anyone ask for today is that you put this over until the full council is seated. And no one has identified any harm in waiting a month for that to happen. Thank you.
Anything else, Joe?
Nothing else. Unless,
Dan, John, anything to add?
Well, I'd add one thing. This council that's sitting up here today is our full council right now. We have 3 people who were elected to serve and are trying their best to do what we believe is right. I don't believe putting this off changes any of the facts. This agreement has to end in 10 years. That's not going to change in January, it's not going to change in February, it's not going to change in March. It's our responsibility to consider this now.
John,
I have nothing that would be productive to add.
could I have a motion?
I'll move to adopt this.
Second? Moved and seconded, all in favor? Aye. Item B, Mr. Robert White to the St. John's Fire Commissioner. Motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All supportive? Aye.
Aye.
Approval of the employee medical insurance premium structure.
Dorota, she's up there. So I presented this request for your consideration last month, and we were and the council proposed that we form a work group, and we did. And Mr. Moffett led the group, and we look at the details and some history. And I don't want to be long, so just so our current structure for health insurance is that the employee pays 20% of the full premium and the town pays 80%. With the recent increases in PBAS rate on the employer portion, the total cost increased. So for the single coverage, the portion would be more than 20%. So the staff is proposing they will continue the 2080 unless the rate would be more than 20, then the rate will fall to what is proposed by PIBA. And on this next page, I don't know if you see it, but there is a PIBA rates that maybe just will give you a little overview. So we are on the standard plan, and that only applies, that change that will fall to what PIBA proposes only applies to a single coverage. Every other coverage as family or dependent or spouse will be 2080. So we're asking that you consider that we continue with the 2080 with the exception if the 20%, if the coverage would be more than 20%, that will fall to what PIBA proposes.
Or requires,
can I add something
Yes.
to that?
requires
Sure.
of the town.
Requires.
So last month, we kind of got hung up on the fact that the state was mandating the employer portion.
Right.
They actually also defined the employee portion, and that's the part we didn't really talk about. And so what Dorota's saying is that we keep the 2080 unless the 20% exceeds what the state said the employee portion can be, and then we back off to be whatever that
Okay.
maximum is. And it's very clean,
Yeah.
very simple.
Right.
So
in terms of what we want to do.
For example, for the single, the 20% would be $112. But the PIBA says it needs to be $97.68.
Okay.
that's
So we're
all
gonna
they do.
take
So
the
it's
$97.68.
Because we're in the standard plan.
Yeah.
There's three places that we're in
The
the-
lower
It's
of
really
it.
simple, the lower of the two.
Yeah, so, but every other coverage will still continue with the 2080.
Got it.
That's good.
Okay,
So
Would
Make a motion?
propose you
I move
approve
that we
it.
adopt this plan.
sounds good.
I'll second.
Second. All in favor?
All right, thanks.
Ms. Tillerson?
I have nothing.
Are you exhausted?
Committee, general comments. John? Dan, anything?
I'd make one comment. For those of you who might have been here, on the 19th of last month, Jenny Honeycutt, who's our representative on county council, updated us on the roads relative to segment C. From my perspective, I was disappointed in what the county had to say, the county staff had to say, in the sense that when they got back all the input on the various road options for segment C, which is our segment, it was split kind of 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. So there was no consensus that this is a great alternative, which then delays everything, because now what they're going to do, which makes sense, is go ask the engineers, okay, if these are the four options, what do you guys think? What's the best option? So unfortunately, we're delayed again. And when it's done and they come back, we'll get to comment on what their proposal is. And maybe during your lifetime, we will get a fix in our roads. But we're continuing to push them and see if we can get some progress on this. But it's another delay. We'll see. It's certainly not Jenny Honeycutt's fault, and it's probably not the staff's fault. But we can't rely on public popularity to decide what's a good road, even though we need input, I know.
I have one comment.
Yes, sir.
On committee. So one of my new roles is the liaison with the Arts Council,
Yeah.
which I've been to a couple of those meetings, and it was very enlightening. It's amazing to me the things that the Art Council puts in place for the entertainment value of the people that live here. And if you've never participated in any of those, you really need to go online and look at some of them, because there's something there for everybody. It's amazing to look
They
at
are
the things
terrific.
and the level of skill of the performers and the other folks that participate. So that's my 2 cents.
Dedicated people. Citizen comments. Hearing, yes, sir?
Again, Michael Heidingsfelder, 2 Shell Creek Landing. I will not comment on the development agreement. I understand your reasoning, I understand your arguments. Please understand that there might be different opinions in the room or in the community about that. But as you also said, you are our elected representatives, so we have to trust that you're doing the right thing. I would just like to make 2 suggestions for the future improvement of these kind of meetings. First, I think it's a question of courtesy to at least comment on some of the comments that were made earlier by the citizens instead of proceeding along the agenda, as it especially relates to several comments made about the contract for our legal advice. But in particular, I would really recommend that the material for these meetings are prepared and provided to the community well in advance. I am aware of the stipulation in the Information Act and the 24-hour timeline that is given there. But I think especially when it comes to such important matters that we discussed here today, a few more days of information to the community would be incredibly helpful. And I think also would help to tone down the emotions, give the community more reason to look at the facts, understand the facts and the figures, and then be better prepared for decisions made by town council. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We're adjourned.